The icy winds of the Himalayas howled through the narrow streets of Lhasa as Arjun Malhotra pulled his woolen jacket tighter and stepped out of the tiny airport. He was a documentary filmmaker from India, known for uncovering forgotten myths and legends, and this time his journey had brought him deep into Tibet. His mission was simple, or at least it seemed so, to shoot a documentary on the mysterious legends surrounding the lost kingdom of Shambhala, a place whispered about in ancient Tibetan scriptures, described as the city of eternal flame. Yet, as Arjun's boots touched the frozen ground, a strange unease settled in his chest, as though the mountains themselves were silently warning him to turn back. The next morning, he arrived at the Jokhang Monastery, where he was to meet Dr. Mei Ling, a renowned Tibetan historian and linguist who had agreed to assist with his research. Mei was a quiet, graceful woman in her mid-30s, her deep knowledge of ancient texts matched only by her skepticism about outsiders seeking forbidden knowledge. Mr. Malhotra, she began softly as they walked through the dimly lit monastery halls, their footsteps echoing against centuries-old stones. Many explorers before you have come chasing Shambhala. Most never return. Are you sure you want to continue? Arjun smiled faintly, masking his unease. Legends exist for a reason, Doctor. I'm here to find the truth, not treasure. She studied him for a long moment before leading him into the monastery's restricted archives, a place very few outsiders had ever seen. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ancient parchment and butter lamps. Scrolls, some older than 1,000 years, lined the walls in delicate wooden shelves. Mei guided Arjun to a small table where a single rolled manuscript awaited. This, she whispered, carefully unrolling the fragile document, is the manuscript of Lhasa. It references Shambhala more clearly than any text we've discovered. Arjun leaned closer, his camera forgotten as he stared at the intricate script written in classical Tibetan. Mei translated slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Beyond the snowy peaks, where the sun never dies, lies the city of eternal flame. Only the pure of heart may enter, for those who seek it with greed shall awaken the curse of the flame. Arjun felt his pulse quicken. A lost city, eternal energy, a curse, it was the stuff of legend, yet the manuscript felt real, its warnings etched by a hand that had known the truth. As they pored over the text, Mei grew increasingly uneasy. Arjun, I must warn you, she said finally, pulling the scroll away. The last man who sought this manuscript was found frozen in a cave 30 miles from here. The monks believe the flame punished him. Arjun chuckled nervously but said nothing. Yet deep inside, a gnawing fear began to take hold. That night, Arjun stayed in a small guest house near the monastery, reviewing his footage and taking notes. Outside, the winds roared, rattling the wooden shutters. Around midnight, a sudden crash shook the quiet of his room. He sprang up, rushing to the window, and saw torchlight flickering near the monastery gates. Dark figures moved swiftly, shadows against the snow. Without hesitation, Arjun grabbed his camera and dashed out into the freezing night, his boots crunching against the icy path as he made his way to the monastery. By the time he reached the archives, chaos had erupted. The ancient shelves lay overturned, scrolls scattered across the floor. Mei was already there, her face pale with fear, clutching the manuscript of Lhasa to her chest. They're here for this, she shouted over the noise, pointing toward a group of masked intruders wielding long Tibetan knives. Arjun grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a pillar as the attackers tore through the room. Just then, a tall, broad-shouldered Sherpa appeared from the shadows, holding a short hunting spear. Come with me if you want to live, he said firmly. It was Dorje, a local guide Mei had mentioned earlier, though Arjun hadn't expected him to appear like this, in the middle of a violent raid. Without time to argue, the three slipped out through a hidden passageway behind the archives, the ancient stone walls damp and narrow as they descended into the cold darkness beneath the monastery. Their footsteps echoed as they ran, following Dorje's torch deeper into the tunnels until they finally emerged into the open night, far from the chaos above. Snow fell heavily now, and Arjun's lungs burned in the thin air. Behind them, the monastery bells rang wildly, warning the entire city of the attack. Dorje turned to them, his face set and unreadable. Those men are not bandits, he said quietly. They belong to a group that has been searching for Shambhala for decades. If they have the manuscript, they will stop at nothing. Arjun glanced at Mei, who still clutched the scroll tightly, and understood the weight of what they carried. As they descended toward the outskirts of Lhasa, Dorje led them into a small stone hut built into the mountainside. Inside, he lit a single lamp and spread a rough map across the table. This path, he said, tracing a line through the towering peaks, leads to the hidden valley described in the manuscript. But it is forbidden. There are reasons no maps mark these trails. May shook her head firmly. We can't go there, Dorje. The prophecy warns us. The curse is real. Dorje met her gaze with an intensity that made Arjun shiver. And yet, he said softly, you came searching anyway. Arjun stayed silent, his mind racing between fear and curiosity. He had come to Tibet to make a documentary, but now he was standing at the edge of something far greater, something ancient, powerful, and dangerous. Outside, the storm grew worse, and in the distance, faint echoes of chanting carried through the wind. Arjun stepped outside for air, gazing at the jagged peaks silhouetted beneath the moonlight. Somewhere beyond those towering mountains, the secrets of Shambhala waited, calling to him with an irresistible pull. But deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was already watching them. Somewhere out there in the darkness, the hunt had begun, and they were no longer the only ones following the path to the city of eternal flame. The storm raged through the night, hammering the mountains with waves of snow and wind, but inside the small stone hut, the silence was heavier than the cold. Arjun sat near the dim lamp, rubbing his hands together for warmth, while May studied the manuscript of Lhasa spread across the rough wooden table. Dorje, crouched in the corner sharpening his hunting knife, seemed lost in thought, his face half hidden in shadow. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded beast, and Arjun couldn't shake the feeling that the monastery raid had only been the beginning. Dorje finally broke the silence, his deep voice carrying a strange calmness. The men who attacked the monastery, they are part of the Black Lotus, an ancient order obsessed with finding Shambhala. For centuries, they've hunted its secrets. They believe the flame of creation hidden there can grant limitless power. May's eyes snapped up from the manuscript, her voice sharp with alarm. The flame isn't a weapon, Dorje. It's a force of balance. If they disturb it, they could destroy everything. Dorje met her gaze with a look so steady it sent chills through Arjun. Which is why we must find Shambhala before they do. Arjun leaned forward, rubbing his temples. You're saying we actually go there? To a place no map shows, no one returns from. Dorje studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. There is an ancient trail, he said, pointing at the map, where he had drawn a faint path between jagged peaks. But it is dangerous. Avalanches, crevasses, storms. And something worse. He hesitated, as though choosing his words carefully. The Guardians. May inhaled sharply, her hands tightening around the manuscript. I've read about them, she whispered. They're sworn to protect Shambhala at any cost, even if it means killing outsiders. Dorje nodded gravely. If they sense greed or deceit, we won't make it past the valley. Morning came gray and bitterly cold, the sun a pale ghost behind a veil of clouds. The three of them packed supplies, thick ropes, climbing axes, dried yak meat, and water skins, and set off into the wild silence of the Himalayas. The wind stung their faces as they trudged along narrow ledges carved into the mountainside, the valleys below hidden beneath an endless sea of clouds. Hours passed in near silence, broken only by the crunch of boots against ice and the distant rumble of shifting glaciers. By midday, the air had grown so thin Arjun struggled to breathe, each inhale like fire in his lungs. How much farther? He managed to rasp, leaning on his trekking pole. Dorje glanced back without breaking stride. 3 days if the weather holds. More if the mountains test us. By nightfall, they made camp beneath a jagged rock overhang, lighting a small fire sheltered from the wind. May sat cross-legged, the manuscript open in her lap, tracing the faded symbols with her fingertips. This passage, she said softly, speaks of the Gate of Clouds. It's described as the entrance to Shambhala, hidden in the heart of the mountains. But it also warns of a trial. She hesitated, glancing at Dorje before continuing. It says, only those who walk without desire shall pass. The others will vanish beneath the eternal snow. Arjun frowned, tossing a twig into the fire. Walk without desire. That's poetic, but what does it even mean? May closed the manuscript carefully, her expression grave. It means Shambhala chooses who enters, and who doesn't. That night, Arjun couldn't sleep. The cold seeped into his bones, and his mind churned with restless thoughts. Somewhere out there, the Black Lotus were on the same trail, hunting them. And if May was right, the valley itself could reject them if their intentions weren't pure. But deep inside, Arjun couldn't deny the excitement that burned in his chest. For years he had chased forgotten legends, and now he was closer than anyone had ever been. If he succeeded, his documentary would change the world forever. Yet, as soon as the thought crossed his mind, he remembered May's warning, those who seek it with greed awaken the curse. By the second day, the weather turned violent. The wind screamed through the peaks, hurling shards of ice like knives, forcing them to crawl along ridges where a single misstep meant falling thousands of feet. Dorje moved like a ghost, unbothered by the storm, his every step steady and deliberate, while Arjun struggled to keep pace, his body aching and lungs burning. As they crossed a frozen ravine, May suddenly stopped, pointing toward the cliffside. Strange symbols were carved into the stone, spirals, suns, and unfamiliar glyphs worn smooth by centuries of wind. Dorje's face hardened as he brushed his fingers against the markings. "These are warnings," he muttered. "The Guardians marked this place. We're close." That night, they camped inside an abandoned cave carved into the mountain wall, its blackened ceiling coated with soot from fires long extinguished. The air inside was heavy, carrying the faint scent of incense, as though someone had once prayed here. As May set up her bedding, Arjun noticed faded murals along the walls, depicting golden cities, towering pillars of light, and figures bowing before a radiant flame. These people, they knew Shambhala was real, Arjun whispered, his voice reverent. May studied the murals with a furrowed brow. "Not just real," she said softly. "They worshipped it. They believed the flame was a gift from the gods." Dorje stirred the fire, his expression unreadable. "Or a curse disguised as a gift," he said darkly. On the third day, as dawn broke over the peaks, they finally reached a narrow pass where the manuscript's map ended. Beyond it, sheer cliffs dropped into a vast mist-shrouded valley, and at its center, hidden between jagged peaks, was something Arjun could hardly believe. A massive stone gate carved directly into the mountain wall, its surface covered in ancient Tibetan script, stood silent and unmoving. May gasped, clutching the manuscript to her chest. "The Gate of Clouds," she whispered, awe and fear mingling in her voice. Arjun stepped forward, his breath trembling as he stared at the towering structure. For the first time since arriving in Tibet, he felt it, the undeniable weight of something ancient and alive watching them. But before they could move closer, Dorje raised a hand, signaling silence. Far below, in the misty valley, faint figures moved like shadows across the snow. Arjun narrowed his eyes, heart pounding. It was them, the Black Lotus. Somehow, they had followed. Dorje's voice was a low growl as he whispered, "We are no longer alone." The wind roared, carrying with it an eerie, distant sound, low, haunting, almost like chanting. May turned to Dorje, her face pale. "The Guardians," she breathed. But Dorje shook his head, his jaw tight. "No, not yet." He stared at the figures in the valley, his expression grim. "First, we deal with them." Arjun's grip tightened around his camera, but in that moment, he realized something far more valuable than footage was at stake. They had finally found the Gate of Clouds, but they were walking straight into a war. The snow whispered beneath their boots as Arjun, May, and Dorje crouched behind a jagged rock ledge, their eyes fixed on the mist-shrouded valley below. The Gate of Clouds loomed above them, ancient and silent, yet the sight of the Black Lotus approaching shattered any sense of awe. A dozen figures moved like phantoms through the snow, clad in black furs and armed with curved Tibetan blades. Their leader, a tall man with a scar running from his jaw to his temple, walked at the front, his pace measured, his gaze locked on the gate. Dorje's hand rested on the hilt of his knife as he whispered, "That's Tenzin Korlo, the Black Lotus warlord. Wherever he goes, death follows." Arjun swallowed hard, his breath fogging in the cold air. "If they reach the gate before us, we lose everything." May's voice was tight with fear but steady. "Worse," she whispered, "if they open it without passing the trials, the curse could destroy us all." Dorje glanced at her, then at Arjun, his face set like carved stone. "Then we cannot let them pass." The three moved swiftly, climbing higher along the ridge, careful to stay hidden from view. The wind howled through the peaks, carrying fine needles of ice that stung their faces, but they pressed on, following a narrow path carved into the cliffside until they stood directly above the Black Lotus warband. Dorje crouched low, pulling a small leather pouch from his belt and scattering its contents onto the rocks, tiny silver pellets that glimmered faintly in the dim light. "Yak oil mixed with powdered salt," he explained softly. Throw it into the fire when the time comes. Arjun didn't have time to ask why. Moments later, the Black Lotus reached the base of the Gate of Clouds. Tenzin Korlo stepped forward, raising his hand, and his followers fell silent. He began chanting in low, guttural Tibetan, his voice resonating unnaturally through the valley. The sound seemed to awaken something ancient, the ground trembled faintly beneath their feet, and a deep, hollow rumble echoed through the mountains. May grabbed Arjun's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. He's invoking the key of fire, she whispered, terror in her eyes. If the gate opens for him, the flame will fall into his hands. Dorje moved before she could finish. With one swift motion, he hurled a small ember into the valley below. It struck a hidden pile of dry shrubs coated with yak oil, and within seconds, a wall of fire roared to life across the path, cutting the Black Lotus off from the gate. Chaos erupted instantly. The masked warriors scattered, shouting in Tibetan, their blades drawn as they searched for the source of the attack. Arjun's heart pounded in his ears as Dorje motioned for them to move. Now, he whispered sharply. We reach the gate before they recover. They scrambled down the ridge, slipping on ice and clawing at rocks for balance, until they landed hard on the frozen ground just 50 meters from the Gate of Clouds. Up close, the structure was even more breathtaking. Towering over 30 feet high, carved entirely from black stone, it was covered in inscriptions that seemed to shimmer faintly under the pale sunlight. Strange spirals and symbols pulsed like veins of light beneath the surface, as though the mountain itself was alive. May approached cautiously, tracing the symbols with her gloved fingers, her breath uneven. This isn't just a door, she whispered. It's a seal. Arjun stepped closer, his camera forgotten entirely now. Can you open it? He asked. May hesitated, studying the manuscript, her lips moving silently as she matched the ancient script to the carvings. It says the gate only opens for those who carry no desire, she murmured. We have to let go of everything we want, the glory, the treasure, even the knowledge. Arjun frowned, his chest tightening. That wasn't possible. Everything he'd risked his life for, his entire career, had brought him here. How could he simply let it go? Before he could answer, a sharp whistle sliced through the wind. Dorje's head snapped up. They've spotted us, he hissed. And then, the Black Lotus attacked. The silence of the valley shattered as arrows rained down, clattering against the rocks around them. Dorje drew his knife and lunged forward, blocking the path as two masked warriors charged. He moved like water, each motion precise and deadly, his blade flashing in the weak sunlight. Arjun grabbed May, pulling her behind a stone pillar for cover, his heart racing. We're trapped, he gasped. May didn't answer, her eyes were locked on the gate, her lips moving rapidly as she recited an ancient verse from the manuscript. And then it happened. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, so low and powerful it vibrated in Arjun's bones. The carvings on the gate flared with golden light, glowing brighter and brighter until the symbols blurred into streams of energy. A sudden gust of wind tore through the valley, knocking both friend and foe to the ground. The Black Lotus warriors froze mid-charge, their eyes wide with awe, or terror, as the massive stone gate began to tremble. Slowly, impossibly, it started to open. Behind the gate was darkness. Not the darkness of shadow, but a living, swirling void, shimmering faintly like starlight trapped beneath ice. Arjun felt his knees weaken as he stared into it, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. May gripped his arm tightly, her face pale. This is it, she whispered, voice trembling. The threshold of Shambhala. But before they could step forward, a thunderous roar echoed through the valley. From the swirling void beyond the gate, shapes began to emerge, tall, silver-skinned figures clad in armor that glimmered like moonlight. Their faces were hidden behind masks of gold, and in their hands they carried long spears etched with glowing runes. Dorje stumbled backward, his voice barely a whisper. The Guardians. The air grew unbearably heavy, as though the entire mountain had turned its gaze upon them. One of the Guardians stepped forward, its voice deep and resonant, reverberating like 1,000 echoes. Those who seek the flame must be judged. Tenzin Korlo strode to the front, his face alight with feverish determination. I am the rightful heir to its power. He shouted, raising his blade high. But before he could take another step, a single Guardian moved with impossible speed, its spear striking the ground. A shockwave rippled through the valley, and Tenzin was thrown backward like a rag doll, crashing into the snow. Arjun realized then, with terrifying clarity, that they were standing between two forces far greater than anything they understood. And as the gate yawned wider, spilling golden light across the frozen mountains, one truth became undeniable: whatever lay beyond was not meant for human hands. Dorje grabbed Arjun's shoulder, his voice low and urgent. "We have one chance," he said. "If we're going in, we go now." Arjun hesitated, his heart pounding. May's grip tightened on his arm, her eyes locked on his. "If we don't," she said softly, "Tenzin will try again. And next time, the Guardians might not stop him." And so, with the Black Lotus regrouping, the Guardians looming, and the mysteries of Shambhala glowing just beyond the gate, Arjun took his first step into the light. The light swallowed them whole. Arjun felt weightless, as if the world beneath his feet had vanished. A rush of icy wind roared in his ears, and for a moment, he thought he was falling into an endless void. But then his boots struck solid ground. Gasping, he opened his eyes, and froze. They stood inside a colossal cavern, its ceiling lost in darkness, its walls carved with intricate symbols that glowed faintly with golden light. Rivers of liquid crystal flowed beneath transparent bridges, casting dancing reflections onto the smooth stone. Towering pillars stretched skyward, etched with constellations that didn't belong to Earth. And in the center of it all, hovering above a pedestal carved from black obsidian, floated a sphere of pure, pulsing energy, the flame of creation. It burned with shifting colors, neither fire nor light, radiating warmth and an indescribable sense of life. May's breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward, her voice trembling. This is Shambhala." Dorje, however, knelt silently, bowing his head low. His lips moved, whispering an ancient prayer Arjun couldn't understand. But before anyone could move closer, the Guardians appeared, materializing from streaks of light around the chamber. A dozen of them encircled the pedestal, their golden masks reflecting the flame's glow. One stepped forward, taller than the rest, its voice echoing like thunder in an empty cathedral. "Three seekers stand where none should tread," it intoned. "Shambhala does not welcome desire. Speak your purpose, or be unmade." Arjun felt every muscle lock tight. The weight of the Guardian's gaze was suffocating, yet he forced himself to answer. "We came to learn," he said, his voice cracking. "To understand what this place is. To protect it from those who'd exploit it." The Guardian tilted its head, studying him in silence, as if measuring his soul. But before it could respond, another sound shattered the stillness, the sharp, echoing crack of boots against stone. Arjun spun around. Tenzin Korlo had followed them through the gate. Behind him, the remaining Black Lotus warriors fanned out, their blades drawn, eyes fixed greedily on the flame. Tenzin's scarred face glistened with sweat, his expression feverish with obsession. "Centuries of whispers, lifetimes of blood," he growled, his voice reverberating through the chamber. "And now, at last, the power of the gods will belong to me." The Guardians reacted instantly. Spears of golden energy manifested in their hands, glowing brighter than the sun, but Tenzin was faster. He hurled a small obsidian shard onto the ground, and it exploded in a shockwave of black mist, sending several Guardians staggering back. "Run!" Dorje roared, pulling Arjun and May behind one of the crystal bridges as chaos erupted. The chamber became a battlefield. Golden energy clashed with swirling shadows as Guardians and Black Lotus warriors collided in blinding bursts of light. Crystals shattered, their fragments raining down like sparks. The flame pulsed violently, its glow intensifying as if feeding on the chaos, and the entire cavern trembled with a deep, rumbling roar. May grabbed Arjun's wrist, her voice urgent above the din. "Listen to me. The manuscript says the flame responds to intent, it's alive. If Tenzin claims it with greed, it will destroy everything." Arjun stared at the sphere, its colors shifting faster, almost agitated, as though it could sense the violence surrounding it. Something inside him stirred, a memory of May's earlier words, "Only those who walk without desire shall pass." His chest tightened. He had come here chasing glory, fame, and knowledge, but now he realized Shambhala didn't want seekers. It wanted protectors. Without another thought, he broke from cover, sprinting toward the pedestal. Dorje shouted his name, but Arjun barely heard him. Tenzin saw him coming and snarled, raising his blade high, but before he could strike, a Guardian intercepted, its golden spear clashing against steel with a deafening ring. Arjun reached the pedestal and stopped, standing just inches from the flame. The heat radiating from it was immense, yet strangely soothing, like standing beneath the sun after a lifetime of winter. Slowly, he lowered himself to his knees, bowing his head. "I don't want your power," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I don't want your secrets. I only want to protect you, to keep this from falling into the wrong hands." For a moment, nothing happened. And then, the flame reacted. Its glow shifted, softening from violent reds and oranges to serene blues and golds. A low hum filled the chamber, drowning out the sounds of battle, and one by one, the guardians stopped fighting. The Black Lotus warriors froze mid-strike as if held by invisible force. Even Tenzin staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock. The lead guardian stepped forward, lowering its spear. "You have spoken truth," it said, its voice reverent now. "Shambhala sees no greed within your heart. The flame recognizes your intent." Arjun barely had time to process the words before the flame surged downward, enveloping him in a column of golden light. It was warm, not burning, not painful, just endless, infinite warmth. Images flooded his mind, visions of civilizations rising and falling, stars being born and dying, galaxies spinning like wheels of fire. He saw Shambhala's creation, its purpose, its burden. The flame wasn't a weapon or a prize. It was balance itself. And then he understood. Shambhala wasn't just a city. It was a safeguard, a living consciousness designed to protect the world from its own destruction. And now, somehow, it had chosen him. When the light faded, Arjun opened his eyes to silence. The Black Lotus warriors lay unconscious, their weapons scattered, while Tenzin knelt on the floor, trembling. The guardians stood motionless, their masks glowing faintly, watching him. The lead guardian spoke again, its voice softer now, like distant thunder. "The choice is yours, Arjun. Guard the flame, or leave and never return." Arjun turned to May and Dorje, his chest still rising and falling rapidly. He saw the hope in May's eyes, the quiet pride in Dorje's. Slowly, he nodded. "I'll protect it," he said simply. The guardian inclined its head, and the gate behind them began to close, sealing the entrance to Shambhala once more. The light dimmed, the hum faded, and the flame returned to its calm, steady glow. Hours later, as they stood outside in the frozen valley, Arjun turned back to where the gate of clouds had vanished into solid rock. The wind howled across the peaks, carrying with it an eerie stillness, as though the mountains themselves were holding their breath. May touched his shoulder gently. "No one will ever believe us," she said softly. Arjun smiled faintly, his breath misting in the cold. "Maybe they're not supposed to." Dorje glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "The Black Lotus will come again," he warned. "I know," Arjun replied, looking toward the distant horizon. "And when they do, we'll be ready." Somewhere deep within the mountain, the flame pulsed once, as if acknowledging his promise. The curse of Shambhala had ended. Or perhaps, it had only just begun.